Welcome to this seminar. Thank you for joining us. This webinar is the second in a series of 3 webinars supported by the Caribbean Regional Oceanscape Project, known as CROP for short. My name is Susanna de Beauville-Scott, and I will be your moderator for this session. The first webinar in the series, titled Delivering Good Ocean Governance in the OECS, is designed for technical officers and introduces the concept of a blue economy, the principles of ocean governance, and explains how ocean governance is being delivered in the OECS. This second webinar on today, titled Looking After Our Oceans in the OECS, seeks to engage students, civil society organizations, and the public at large on ocean matters. And the third and final webinar in the series focuses on a blue economy for the OECS and targets high-level policymakers. All webinars will be made available on demand via the OECS webinar webpage, and we will post that link in the chat shortly. With me here today is Professor Dickon Howell as the key speaker. Professor Howell has over 10 years of global experience in bringing together stakeholders at all levels to deliver blue economy solutions in support of sustainable development. Among his many contributions to the areas of ocean governance and blue economy, he has directed the development and the delivery of ocean policies, and this includes delivering the revision of the Eastern Caribbean Regional Ocean Policy and the development of national ocean policies for 5 of the OECS member states. Also present today is Commander David Robin, the coordinator for the OECS Ocean Governance and Fisheries Program. Commander Robin is a retired commanding officer of the St. Vincent and Grenadines Coast Guard Service with experience in maritime safety, security, environmental protection, and fisheries monitoring, control, and surveillance. And lastly, but by no means least, Dr. Marie-Louise Felix, who is a marine, aquaculture, and wildlife conservation biologist and has experience working with the World Wildlife Fund, where she was responsible for several international wildlife trade programs in Suriname, Guyana, and French Guiana. Dr. Felix is currently a lecturer in biology and environmental science at the Sir Arthur Lewis Community College in St. Lucia. Before I hand over to Professor Howell and to give him a chance to share his screen, there are just a few points to note. We will be taking questions after the presentation and remarks from our panel. However, please feel free to submit questions at any time at all via the Q&A box, which can be found at the bottom of your screen. There is also a chat box where comments or feedback can be placed. Feel free to add any supporting or any other relevant comments on the issue being raised. We will also be administering a poll closer to the end of the webinar, and I'll call that out when we're putting it up. It's just a couple of questions, and we're encouraging all of you to respond to these. So Professor Howell, over to you.
Thank you, Susanna, for your kind words. As you said, today's webinar is going to explore the marine environment of the OECS and what's being done to protect this valuable resource for future generations. This webinar focuses on why coasts and oceans are important to the OECS, what makes them special and how they contribute to our lives, why they're under threat and how we can manage them now and in the future to benefit our economy and society without damaging the precious natural environment. The ocean covers more than 2/3 of our planet and is the foundation of life on Earth. It regulates the Earth's climate, produces oxygen in the air that we breathe, and absorbs carbon dioxide. Driven by a growing global population and the opportunity for new sources of economic growth, the ocean is becoming an increasingly powerful economic frontier. Estimates of its contribution to the world economy range from 1.5 trillion to $3 trillion a year, or 3 to 5% of global economic activity, a figure that's likely to keep increasing. More than 1.4 million people live in the OECS, with a large proportion of them directly depending on the ocean for their livelihoods. At the same time, activity on land has a direct impact on the ocean. and must be managed with this in mind, a concept known as island system management, where an island is considered as one system from the highest ridge to the offshore limit of a country's exclusive economic zone. There is a balance to be found. The social and cultural foundation of millions around the world and their physical and emotional well-being depends on the health of the ocean. It is crucial that we manage our ocean space in an integrated and effective way.
I once heard someone say that we very often look at the ocean in the Caribbean as what divides us, but at the same time, it can be looked at as what joins us together.
The state of our ocean underpins human health, wealth, culture, identity and happiness. A means to explain the value of nature and understand the complex ways in which natural, social and economic systems interact with one another has been developed, called the natural capital approach. Natural capital is the world's stocks of natural resources. These include rocks, soil, air, water and all living things. Humans get a wide range of benefits, often called ecosystem services, from this natural capital, which make our life possible. The most obvious ecosystem services include the food we eat, the water we drink, and the materials we use for fuel and building. There are also less visible ecosystem services, such as climate regulation and natural flood defences provided by mangroves, the billions of tonnes of carbon stored by coastal wetlands, or the coastal protection provided by coral reefs. Even less visible are cultural ecosystem services, such as the inspiration we take from wildlife and the natural environment. Ocean health, and therefore the natural capital or value of the ocean environment, is increasingly vulnerable to both human activities on land and at sea, all made worse by climate change. From an environmental perspective, we must manage our oceans more sustainably to protect fragile marine ecosystems under increasing pressure. From an economic point of view, many economic activities rely on the ecosystem services of the ocean. It's important that this natural capital is not overexploited, either by one industry taking too much or having too many operators in the same space. From a social well-being perspective, the ocean is in the soul of island nations. It is not simply a place of work, but a place for relaxation, exercise, family. It is an integral part of daily life. So when we talk about the natural capital we get from the oceans in the Caribbean, what are we referring to? The wider Caribbean region is composed of three large marine ecosystems, or LMEs: the Gulf of Mexico, the Caribbean, and the North Brazil Shelf. Within the Caribbean LME, there are three main types of smaller ecosystem: coral reefs and associated habitats such as mangroves, seagrass beds and coastal lagoons; the continental shelf ecosystem, which is the nearshore waters and seabed habitats between the outer edge of the coral reef and where the ocean drops off to the deep sea; the offshore pelagic ecosystem, which includes offshore waters and the animals that live within it. 35% of all marine life in the world lives on coral reefs. An amazing 10% of the world's coral reefs can be found in the Caribbean. They are one of the most biodiversity-rich ecosystems in the world, providing habitat and food for an amazing variety of marine plants and animals, including a quarter of all marine fish species. Coral reefs create complex structures which serve as habitats, shelters, nurseries and foraging grounds for almost all types of marine organism. Up to 4,000 individual species can coexist on a single reef at a density 100 times greater than is average for the open ocean. In the OECS, the majority of reefs are fringing coral reefs that grow near the coastline and are separated from the shore by shallow lagoons. Because they're near shore, coral reefs are closely linked to both mangroves and seagrass beds, and many marine species move between these ecosystems during their lives. However, this connectivity with land makes them vulnerable to human impacts such as pollution, and means that managing an island as a system is even more important. Disturbance of any ecosystem component can result in widespread impact. For example, overfishing of parrotfish and a dieback in sea urchins has resulted in algal growth covering many reefs in the OECS, killing the coral. Parrotfish and urchins feed on excess algae, and without them, the algae multiplies out of control, creating a fundamental shift in the ecosystem which can lead to total collapse. In fact, average coral cover in the Caribbean declined over 50% between 1970 and 2012, mainly due to the impacts of human activity, a trend that isn't slowing down. Work is being done to rebuild though. In Grenada, coral nurseries, where coral fragments are grown until they're large enough to be transplanted to new areas, have been installed in Grandance Bay and off Mabui Island, Carriacou. Local young people have been trained to maintain these nurseries, building both local expertise and employment. The corals grown in these nurseries will be used to replant parts of the Grandance Reef Bank and the Bayalo Barrier Reef, and will hopefully help these reefs to become vibrant marine ecosystems once more. And it's not just in Grenada, but this is happening in St. Lucia and other OECS nations as well.
We have been working a lot with communities in the area of habitat restoration, and we've specifically focused on coral reef restoration, where we have been working with communities to empower them and get them involved in coral restoration activities. Now, for me, the opportunity to enhance their livelihoods by not only expanding their skills, but having the potential for supplementary income is key. And what we have been doing with the assistance of Durban Development Bank, GIZ, the Caribbean Development Bank, the Sandals Foundation, and our local partners is develop educational tools. We've developed a national vocational qualification in coral restoration that is actually at this point at the level of an associate degree. We have been working with communities, and we have a cohort of 15 persons that we have trained so far in coral restoration activities. Now, these are underprivileged people from the community, young people who in some instances may have been considered to have fallen through the cracks in terms of education, and they are actually learning by doing. And this is involving communities in the oceans, and these are fishers as well. So they're actually working in the environment that they're used to. And I believe that having folks and community members, young people, become involved in projects and activities like this is something that is a positive aspect of development in terms of the blue economy, getting them prepared to take advantage, sustainable use, sustainable livelihoods, and enhancement of their livelihoods to prepare them for the whole ethos of the blue economy.
In the OECS, most coastal wetlands are mangrove swamps. Mangroves grow where fresh water meets the sea and are subject to the twice daily ebb and flow of tides. These ecosystems are only found in tropical and subtropical areas and have salt-tolerant trees, shrubs and other vegetation growing in seawater from the low to high tide zone. Mangrove swamps have often been neglected because they look like a mass of impenetrable woody vegetation. They are often misunderstood and viewed as mosquito-infested swamps or wasteland. But they provide a rich habitat for over 2,000 species of animals and plants and are the breeding and nursery grounds for fish, shrimp, prawns, crabs and shellfish. They sustain billions of worms, barnacles, oysters, sponges and other invertebrates, some of which live attached to mangrove roots. These in turn feed those fish and shrimp, which support wading birds and other larger predators. They also provide important coastal protection from waves and flooding, as the mangroves absorb energy from storms and provide shelter for areas inland. In the last 20 years, at least 35% of the world's mangrove forests have been lost. These losses exceed those for both tropical rainforests and coral reefs. They are threatened by land reclamation, wastewater and solid waste pollution, climate change and overharvesting, not helped by their bad reputation. In the OECS, there are projects ongoing to protect and restore these important ecosystems, such as the protection given to Mancote, the largest mangrove forest in St. Lucia and the OECS, and the restoration work ongoing in Grenville, a fishing community on the northeast coast of Grenada that has seen severe flooding and erosion. Seagrass is a submerged flowering plant found throughout the OECS that grows in shallow water meadows in sand or mud. It is often found in the lagoons between beaches and coral reefs or in protected bays and estuaries. These meadows are crucial for stabilising the seabed, providing shelter and nursery grounds for fish and a food source for many organisms, including turtles. They also help to improve water quality by slowing down currents and allowing fine particles to settle out. Seagrass meadows are currently also under threat. They can be destroyed or removed completely by coastal developments, scarred by anchors and propellers, shaded by marinas and piers, and impacted by pollution from sewage, agricultural fertilisers, hydrocarbons, pesticides and other toxic waste. On top of these impacts, there is also an invasive species affecting the region that has spread all the way from the Indian Ocean and Red Sea, most likely via boats. This invasive seagrass is replacing native Caribbean seagrass and causing ecological damage. If you see any, you can report it via this website and contribute to ongoing research on the spread of this invasive species. The importance of seagrass beds has been recognised in many places in the OECS. For example, the Grandance Bay Marine Protected Area was put in place on Grenada's busiest tourist beach to protect the seagrass beds, which are an important food source for the local turtle population. Talking of turtles, the Caribbean once supported huge populations of sea turtles. Early records talk of groups of turtles so massive that net fishing was impossible and even moving ships was difficult. Today, some of the largest breeding populations the world has ever known are virtually gone. Because sea turtles are highly migratory, what appears as a decline in a local population may be consequences of activity hundreds or thousands of miles away. Therefore, while local conservation is crucial, international action is also required. Threats to turtles include commercial fishing for meat and shells, entanglement or eating marine litter, nests and hatching being disrupted by artificial lights and coastal development, and marine pollution. For nearly 50 years, the wider Caribbean Sea Turtle Conservation Network, or WIDECAST, has worked with more than 40 Caribbean nations to develop a unified management framework for the region.
Culturally, being able to kill turtles and use it for livelihoods, for food, use the turtle eggs, etc. for food, that has been a cultural practice. However, we now look at the fact that this is biodiversity that has to be protected, and the students in Grenada who benefit from the spatial program, they train guides to be able to understand how the turtles nest, how to protect that resource, because Grenada's tourism asset is based on these ecotourism activities. These students are important advocates. They are tomorrow's leaders. They are the future that we're protecting the environment for. And they also can go back home and say to their relatives, Uncle Charlie, you know, you don't need to kill the turtles for meat because you sell this turtle for $100, but this is an industry for Grenada that brings in $30, $40, $50, $60, $100,000 annually in terms of visitors who travel just to come to see this biodiversity that's not available in their own home country. So it's as simple as that, it's as intricate as that, it's as real as that.
Marine mammals are very important to the OECS, and at least 32 species have been documented within the region. For many of these, the waters of the OECS are the primary habitat for feeding, mating and calving. Despite this importance, in the past 250 years, the Caribbean is one of only 2 regions in the world to have experienced the extinction of a marine mammal species, the Caribbean monk seal, and there continues to be pressure from increasing use of the ocean, particularly from the tourism and cruise industries. The economies of island nations rely significantly on this natural capital that we've just talked about. Economic activity must be in balance with the long-term capacity of marine ecosystems to support it and remain resilient and healthy. The blue economy concept is about generating wealth from our oceans and seas in a sustainable way and protecting natural capital. It promotes economic growth, social inclusion and improvement of livelihoods, whilst at the same time ensuring environmental sustainability and maintaining the health of ocean resources.
To me, when I think about the blue economy, I think about sustainable oceans. I think about the ecosystem services that the oceans provide, and one of the key ecosystem services is livelihoods as well as food security. And for me, the people component is the most important, and working with the people to ensure that they have a sustainable livelihood for me, is one of the key important components of a blue economy.
A blue economy is generated by a range of marine sectors and related policies that together set out a path for the sustainable use of ocean resources. It moves beyond business as usual to consider economic development, ocean health and social benefit as concepts that can live in harmony alongside one another. Existing sectors such as fisheries, shipping, tourism and coastal development will continue to boom, while technology and innovation are opening new opportunities in marine energy, aquaculture, seabed mining and marine biotechnology. It recognises that while some activities depend on the health of the oceans, such as fishing, all have the potential to degrade them. As such, the impact of all human activities on the ecosystem needs to be minimised, or the jobs and economic growth that depend on those living resources will be put at risk. A blue economy cannot be delivered in a meaningful way without considering all these activities that go on in our oceans, or which have the ability to impact them. The challenge is how to manage these seemingly competing sectors as efficiently as possible.
We must not look at that development in silos. We need to make sure that whatever development and what economic growth that goes into tourism also trickles down into the man on the ground. And if that is not done, then we'll be able to have an imbalance. So whatever happens within tourism, within planning, they must create that type of balance, or even the figures must show that tourism brings X amount into GDP, fishing brings X amount, diving and snorkeling bring X amount. But how can we increase? How can it all be done sustainably? We also have to look at the carrying capacity. That is very important. So if tourism talks about increasing tourist arrival or increasing yacht arrivals, increase of cruise ship arrivals, how does that increase impact on the marine environment? Is it going to be negatively or positively? So yes, numbers come in, but we need to look at the balance in terms of how all of these persons or individuals are going to use the resource and not diminish the value of that resource. Very important.
Environmental management, I should say, cannot be done by one department, by one ministry. Because when we look at it in a general sense, when we look at the big picture, the environment affects everybody, right? So housing, health, fisheries, sports, everybody is involved in it, right?
So much OECS territory is ocean space, and ocean resources are so critical to the region's sustainable development. It is clear that it must be well governed to ensure continued benefits to current and future generations. Good ocean governance should bring stakeholders together to identify and pursue shared goals and develop a shared vision. It should be ecosystem-based and integrated. It should catalyse the negotiation, adoption and ratification of international conventions and enable delivery. It should mobilise strategic partnerships and look to enhance coordination, collaboration, cooperation and participation among key programmes, projects and initiatives. It should be based upon the best available evidence and have clear links from science to policy and decision making. And lastly, it should deliver policy, legal and institutional reform and recognise that regulation and enforcement are necessary, but that voluntary approaches should also be encouraged. The OECS heads of government have endorsed a groundbreaking regional policy framework, the Eastern Caribbean Regional Ocean Policy, or ECROP, that recognises the need to ensure the sustainable management of the ocean as the basis for livelihoods, food security and economic development, and address the challenges facing our ocean environment and the transition to a blue economy.
At the OECS, the sustainable ocean economy, or the blue economy, is delivered through the implementation of our Eastern Caribbean Regional Ocean Policy and Strategic Action Plan, otherwise called the ECROP. The ECROP is a document which was approved by the OECS authority, that's the heads of government, in 2013. It is the international best practice for regional cooperation on matters pertaining to oceans. It seeks to deliver in the areas of economic, environmental, and social sustainability.
National ocean policies are also being developed in the OECS. They are closely aligned with the ECROP to allow for the national delivery of regional outcomes and goals. An NOP is a framework policy that provides the national direction and framework within which various sectors such as fisheries, maritime transport, tourism, energy, climate change, coastal development or adaptation can work well together, and it guides operational decision making on the ground.
There are some challenges, yes, in changing from a sectoral approach of doing business to a whole governance, whole government, multi-sectoral implementation of ocean affairs. Over the years, we have evolved in working in sectors. Now we have to roll that back to the indivisible roles of oceans and its multiple subcomponents.
Across the world, marine spatial planning, or MSP, is used by governments as a way to map the ocean's health and wealth. The process of MSP looks to identify all current and potential future activities within a blue economy and to map these alongside the natural marine environment and social and cultural uses of the ocean. And it's particularly important in guiding decision making and reducing conflict over multiple uses, such as marine tourism, recreation, biodiversity conservation, fisheries, oil and gas, mining or transport.
Ocean governance is of extreme importance, and marine spatial management, especially on an island, a small island like Dominica, where we have the greatest amount of economic and commercial activity occurring on the coastline. It is important that we'll be able to zone and to have different areas demarcated to prevent chaos and user conflict, for conservation of the marine resources, and for efficient use of the very limited space that we have for an island. So marine spatial planning is of extreme importance.
From a fisheries perspective, having to find ourselves that we have to share an ocean which was traditionally dominated by fishing activities with other sectors such as tourism, recreation, and even research, even now the creation and formation of MPAs or MMAs, some say marine management areas, marine protected areas, but whatever the case may be, now these areas, we now have to accept that spatial planning is going to be done, has to take place, and where do we fit ourselves so that we can have can cohabit, and co-manage with other sectors.
Most OECS nations are already applying some aspects of MSP through area-based management, such as designating shipping lanes, allocating fishing areas, establishing protected areas, and implementing marine management areas.
I think it all starts with trying to get these people to understand that they have a vested interest in the resources, and they have cultural attachments to those resources. So we don't want to have, in the process of protecting those resources, those cultural attachments are severed. So we've essentially started doing sensitizations with the different communities, stakeholders, and try to ensure that they know why we're protecting the resources. The intention is not to stop them from the traditional use of the area or prevent them from generating a livelihood. The objective is to ensure that their livelihoods continue to exist in the future. We don't want to have a situation where we continue to allow them to fish unsustainably, for example, and then we have their livelihoods coming to an abrupt end because there's no more fish for them to harvest. We want to ensure that they understand that our objective is to ensure that their livelihoods continue to exist.
Evidence is needed to understand economic, environmental and social factors. It is important to understand what economic activities are happening where, how much GDP they create, and where the main employment opportunities arise. It is also important to understand how the marine and coastal ecosystem functions and how it may be affected by ongoing or future economic activity. And lastly, Understanding how society uses the marine and coastal space is also important. This should include all uses, not just employment, but leisure, recreation, culture, health and well-being. Planning for blue growth involves everyone. We all have a stake in how the ocean's wealth and resources are used. MSP needs coastal communities, fishers, tourism organisations, divers, shippers, the private sector and government authorities to come together and agree on a common vision for our shared ocean space and our blue economy. It is important to engage with these stakeholders early in the process and keep the engagement going all the way through. The more one group of stakeholders understands the needs of another, the more accepting they will be.
So we have understood the green economy for a while, you know, agriculture and tours and forest tours and so on. We are now moving into the blue economy. So you have boat to throat tours. You can go out on a boat, you can pick your own fish, you can take it to the land and prepare it and have this fabulous experience. We've been doing this work, but we have not been able to quantify it. So a fisher does not necessarily see himself in the national GDP. Okay, he doesn't see his contribution because he doesn't necessarily make a contribution to taxes and so on. With this Blue Economy Initiative, we can empower the fisher. We can actually show what is your contribution to national development in terms of dollars, but also in terms of providing sources of protein, representing your country to other tourists around the world, encouraging conservation and so on. So this is our opportunity to value the work that fishers and persons in that sector do, and to also to value them, because now they are able to show what they contribute to the country, to their communities, to their families, in terms of diet and health and well-being, and of course in terms of money.
We all have a stake in how the ocean's wealth and resources are used. We all have to decide how, where and when we will be part of this new blue future.
So for me, the ocean is like another underworld, which it is. It's like exploring a new planet.
So if everybody could pitch in, it would make a difference. And again, as I said, I think education is the best way to do it.
It means to me, I love the water, so the ocean is my love. All right.
Thanks for listening, and over to Susanna.
Thank you, Dr. Howell. The great presentation. I particularly like the people component, because in this region, oceans form an integral part of every individual's life, and so we all really need to be involved in decision making. I will now call on Commander Robin to make his remarks.
Thank you very much, Madam Moderator. Thank you very much, Professor Howell, for this excellent presentation. It certainly ends with an appropriate call to action, using our slogan, championing resilient oceans for prosperity, CROP. This is also the acronym for our project through which this webinar is delivered. But this call to action is really based on a vision for a better life of the people, better life for the people of the OECS. And the call to action recognizes the contribution that each of us has to make. It is a whole of society call to be guardians of our largest natural capital, our ocean space. We have lived by it in many years, and we continue to live by it. It is the source of significant livelihood, and that therefore we need to maintain it for the future. Significantly, it calls by our youth, because they are our future, and therefore we must invest in that aspect. There's the call for education, which is seen as being very important, and therefore that links with a call to our academic institutes, our colleges, our secondary school, even to our primary school. Because if we are able to inculcate this aspect of the care of our oceans into the requirements for looking after our livelihood through its sustainable use now and into the future, we will also benefit a lot better. It calls for the whole of government in the multiple agencies that are responsible. It is called for our communities. It's a call for our users, our fishers. It's a call for all of the agencies, the private sector. We are in this call together to champion resilient oceans for current and future generations. I look forward to hearing the questions that come to us. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Commander Robin. Dr. Felix, your remarks?
Yes, good morning, everyone, and great and very thorough presentation. I hope this has reminded a number of the students who are listening on of all the stuff that they've been learning and to see the relevance. What I would want just to remind persons, because we often, when we hear the blue economy, people think it is something that is distant and separate from them. And the important thing, as we were told, 14 million people living near the coast. So in one way or the other, there's so many people who are dependent on the marine environment. And the reality, especially in the Caribbean, in the OECS, is that all of us are living near the coast. Even if you're living on top of a mountain, because we are most of us islands, we live really close. And every facet of what we do is impacted, and we impact on on the blue economy. And it is extremely important in these times of COVID, where we've seen many countries, their economies are seriously at risk because tourism has been impacted. Gratefully, our fisheries sector has not been impacted significantly by COVID. But we have so many other economic activities which very much depend on the ocean. We have the tourism, we have fisheries, we have aquaculture, we have sea moss production, we have recreation, just what keeps us sane. A few days ago, last week, on the Thursday holiday, people were amazed at how many persons flocked to the sea. So what I want to remind persons, all persons here, is that we are part of the blue economy. Even when you do not realize that you are involved, you are. Every time you purchase a fish, every time you go to the beach, you use a ferry to go to Martinique or Dominica or Guadeloupe. You go and pick up something in the store. Most of the items we see in the stores have come into St. Lucia because unfortunately we still rely on a lot of imports. They come in via the ocean. So therefore it is also our role, everyone's role, to be part of mechanisms that protect our marine ecosystem. Because when we do that, we protect the economy, the blue economy. So I'm looking forward to the great work that OECS is doing. And I'm looking forward to people participating and recognizing that they have a part to play in sustaining the Caribbean and the OECS with regards to its economic development, especially its blue economic development. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Felix. Let's move on to some of the questions. I think some of the remarks provided by yourself and Commander Robin actually answered a few of the questions, but I just want to note that we have a number of students with us today. One question from, and I'm taking it that it was from a student, was how is this all important? Another comment coming in from Nadia was, why are the youth not taking up the mantle and championing ocean matters? So from the two different perspectives, we as the managers of the resource are wondering why the youth are not getting involved. And the youth is asking the question, why is all of this important? What is your take on this, Dr. Felix?
I believe it's just this, that we are part of the blue economy, but many people, especially young people, do not see the role that they play. So hence the question, why is it important? Some people may simply tell you, but you know, I don't go to the beach, or I don't eat fish. So it's not relevant to me. And so there's a very, very important need, and maybe through the OECS, through also our education systems, to ensure that young people see the linkages within their livelihoods and that of a safe and healthy marine ecosystem. Until this is done, they will continue to ask questions. Why is it so important? Is it relevant to me? And then they are also not sure what role they play in ensuring the sustainable development through the blue economy.
Thank you, Dr. Felix. I note that some of the students were actually trying to respond to that question by saying that we should stop littering, etc. And that's a good starting point. We can only control our actions in many cases, and therefore stopping the littering that affects the marine environment is one good way. Commander Robin, one question that came up is on the whole issue of ocean governance and the whole system of ocean governance. How is this working in the OECS? What is the role of civil society? We've heard that it's not the responsibility of one ministry or one sector. So how is this really working in the OECS? Briefly, because Professor Howell's presentation touched on this. So just your comments, please.
Thank you very much. In the OECS, there are several approaches, but all integrated, that we have undertaken. First, at the national level, the member states are moving to ensure that they establish national ocean governance committees. These would comprise governmental agencies which have responsibilities for ocean affairs. They'll include private sector. It would include the communities. It would include the academic institutions. It would include civil society as a whole in its entire range. So the cabinets of the respective governments are establishing these. Some have already been established and others are being undertaken, and this is given high priority so that we will have this functional mechanism that can bring aboard all of the views and integrate those so that we can have all of the persons participating in the actions that are needed as we seek to move to all of what has been mentioned before.
Thank you. Another question here, and I'm going to pose it to Professor Howell. It's by Darrell Dubois. We need to find ways to influence and support sustainable fisheries such as aquaculture. How can the OECS help empower young people in developing ocean sustainability?
That's a great question. I think the gentleman at the end of the video said it better than I could, actually. It's all about education. It's about getting the importance of the ocean and the marine environment, about how you manage it sustainably, onto the curriculum at an early age, so that young people are educated, that they're interested in the marine environment, they're interested in how they can look after it sustainably. And then alongside that, they can see that there are viable careers and they have viable futures in those particular industries. I know that when we were out revising the Eastern Caribbean regional ocean policy and developing national ocean policy in some of the countries in the OECS over the last year or so, we were also going into schools and talking to some of the young people about their connection with the ocean. And I think what I found amazing was that it's difficult in some places for those young people to even get down to the beach, which is unusual considering that you're small islands, but they're not unusual when you think that a lot of that coastline is taken up in tourism or other kind of issues. So there are factors across the board there that ranging from access to the marine environment, to education, to being able to see future career opportunities. And all of those things need, I think, supporting from the bottom up in the OECS countries.
Thank you, Professor. David, question for you. It's from Judd Cadet. I have noticed that the blue growth master plans, or blue growth master plans in general, tend to be focused heavily on tourism and very little conservation. Doesn't that contradict the fundamental principle of the blue economy?
Thank you very much. On this question, we can understand why there appears to be that conflict. I want to give the assurance that in the work which is being delivered through the Caribbean Regional Oceanscape Project, it is not simply a focus on tourism and the creation of a conflict. All of what will be done and which plans, the coastal master plans, which are to be developed and delivered, will certainly take into consideration the environmental and the ecological aspects of the whole balance of sustainable development, so that we will have a balance of what is good for our environment, what is good for a better life of the people in the OECS, touching on their livelihoods and so forth, and what is economically important. The point has been made in the presentation that part of the challenge comes from the impacts with, for example, shipping and tourism. We are looking at these, and all of our governments and all of the stakeholders who are working with this have given the undertaking and the understanding that this is how these are going to roll out. We would like to encourage our society. We'd like to encourage, especially in our other remaining engagements with our societies, do keep in touch with your various national focal points. We'll encourage them to do so. We have done a stakeholder analysis to ensure that all of the various persons, individual agencies who need to be in that conversation, be part of it, so that you can then make sure your voices are heard. So we are certainly avoiding that conflict.
Thank you, Commander Robin. I'm just going to launch the poll at this point, but I have a question for Dr. Felix. Launch poll. The question is, this type of information in terms of the blue economy, etc., is this going to be included in curriculum training? The whole ocean governance and blue economy and all the principles, etc. Will this get incorporated in curriculum training?
Okay, well, thank you. So, whilst I don't develop curricula, I could say that at least for the for South Louis Community College, under our Environmental Science and Sustainable Development Associate degree, students are required to do a number of courses. One of the more advanced courses is Sustainable Cities, and under the Sustainable Cities, there is a component on the blue economy. What I would like to see is that there are various components that currently exist under different environmental science programs, both at the advanced level, that's CAPE, and in some of the, even in some of the biology courses at the secondary school level. I am not sure what exists at different colleges around the Caribbean, but as I said, there's so many ways in which we impact the blue economy and so many ways in which we are involved in ocean governance. Sometimes we don't realize it because we don't use the actual terms. But if you are teaching students or young persons or older persons or anyone with how you manage, you get involved in solid waste management, how you have to be concerned what happens to your sewage, when you start looking at hazardous waste management, especially pesticides and other forms of other agrochemicals, when you start looking at spatial planning, and sometimes we don't use a term like this, but where you start talking about how do we share our coastline equitably, so some people can fish, but some people can go on to the beach and use it for recreation, that some people have the right to do the coastal or deep sea fishing, that the persons who have hotels, persons that can be involved in doing scuba diving. We are all actually involved in ocean governance. And so what is so necessary is that, again, people make the link that every time you learn not to litter, you are contributing to the sustainable management of your coastal and your marine area. So whilst it may not be specified in various curricula, I'm pretty certain that if you're doing ecology, if you're doing environmental science, if you're doing various components of geography, you are actually learning a little bit. What may be necessary is for us, the lecturers, the managers, to make the linkages so people are aware of these linkages. I hope that helps answer a little bit.
Yes, yes, it does. Thank you very much for that, Dr. Felix. There is a brief question in the chat where it's asking, is there technical assistance available to the OECS countries in drafting and implementing crop policies? Just to note, crop is a project, and so I'm assuming you mean policy within the Eastern Caribbean Regional Ocean Policy. And yes, the crop is a project that is actually providing technical assistance to the countries to develop ocean policies. And we've done so for 5 of the participating countries, which is Dominica, Grenada, St. Kitts and Nevis, St. Lucia, and St. Vincent and the Grenadines. The next question up, I'm going to pose it to Professor Howell. What international cooperation beyond the Eastern Caribbean are being considered? And while you think on that question, I'm just going to give a little bit on the poll. We note that about 90% of persons, 87 at this point, it's still moving, have found this webinar useful. At least about 69% of you had the basics understood already, and that is really good to know that persons at least have understood the basics of ocean governance and the blue economy approach, etc. So thank you for doing that poll, and over to you, Professor Howell, to answer the question, what international cooperation beyond the Eastern Caribbean are being considered?
Thanks, Susanna. I guess in terms of the Eastern Caribbean Regional Ocean Policy, when we were revising that, we were very careful to make sure that it was aligning with the UN Sustainable Development Goals primarily, and not just SDG 14, which is about the oceans, but about 70%, I think, of the SDG goals in some way affect the oceans, which just shows how interconnected island states are from the land to the sea. So there is that connection going upwards there, and then also we were making sure that regionally we were looking at other important mechanisms like the St. George's Declaration, but also other areas that touch the ocean that you might not think of immediately, such as the Regional Security Strategy, which is looking at how you safeguard security on the seas, and then trying to link that all the way down to national level. And I think that's in terms of ocean governance. When you're looking at things like conservation, there are some species, marine mammals, turtles, where it's incredibly important to have international cooperation, and I think initiatives like YCAST are a really good example of how regionally and internationally you can get countries pulling together to deal with those marine species that have very large ranges. Susanna, if I may as well, I would also, in connection with the last question, I would also just like to say that through the Caribbean Regional Oceanscape Project, we are developing an online education course that's going to be looking at aspects of the blue economy, including looking at some of the career paths that might be open and how it's dealt with in a bit more detail. That will be delivered, as you know, Susanna, in the coming months. I think sometime next year probably. But just let people know that there is that resource that will be coming along soon. Thanks, Susanna.
Thank you, Professor Howell. And there are a number of other resources that are being produced in terms of knowledge products that are being produced under the crop, including a number of ebooks, this series of webinars, a non-tech game aimed at primary schools students, and a tech game that is aimed at all the students, that encourages the whole ocean theme and the whole learning of ocean issues and ocean matters, etc. There's a question directly related to the presentation, but I will pose it to Commander Robin and Professor Howell. You will chime in at the end if you need to add anything to David's response. The question states, in the presentation, oil and gas were mentioned as a sector of the blue economy. Is exploiting oil and gas present in the ocean not going to contribute to climate change? Doesn't this defeat the whole purpose of moving towards clean energy?
Thank you very much for this very important question. And I am particularly pleased that our significant audience is our youth. And so I will answer, because this question really speaks about sustainability, not only what's good for us now, but for in the future. So oil and gas does present a significant risk. We know of experience in the past, in not too far from us, but the question is really asking us to search deeply, and the answer is, because it presents a risk, we should look at how we can avert this. But some facts. Over 25% of our GDP in some instances is spent on oil importation. If we then have to avert the use of this and become more sustainable, we would need to look at other means of utilizing our sea space to generate energy. So there could be the possibility of offshore wind. There could be the possibility of where we are able to do other measures for generating sustainable energy from our ocean space. I believe then we should explore these options, and these are some which we certainly are looking at this time. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Professor Howell, would you want to respond?
Yeah, I would. Thank you, Susanna. Thank you, David. I think you're absolutely right that the world in general is moving away from oil and gas as an energy source. And I think most of the countries in the OECS have national energy policies that set out that transition to clean energy, whether that's from oceanic sources such as offshore wind and wave and tidal, or indeed onshore sources such as solar and onshore wind. But the reality is that that transition to clean energy is going to take a minimum of 10 years and probably 20. And in the meantime, it is important that the extraction of oil and gas as a incredibly valuable commodity and natural resource is done in a regulated and managed way. And as such, it has to be included as a blue economy sector, albeit one that most countries and all countries in the OECS have an aspiration to transition away from.
Thank you. The next question, I'm going to take that same order. I'm going to pose it to Commander Robin, and again, Professor Howell, if you could chime in after that. It's on seaports. It states, given that seaports and their intermodal connectors are the key type of infrastructure in the OECS, what progress has been made, if any, towards blue port operations?
Thank you very much again for this question. We have had in the OECS several studies which explore how we may do this. In fact, even beyond the OECS, we have had studies which go back decades. Part of the challenge really has a relation to an imbalance that we are experiencing with the shipping industry, what comes to us, and how this is done. That challenge is, how do we ensure that the ports are so set up to allow us to transition? At the moment, there are several things which are for consideration and provide an advantage of some sort to the OECS. The intermodal bit really needs to transition to a point where we are able, consistent with the OECS framework, which allows for a movement of persons and of goods, to allow for movement of transportation aboard ship through our ferries. And so that intermodal aspect that would allow not only for the movement of cargo, would also then be able to allow for the movement of persons through their personal vehicles. What needs to be addressed in our framework has to be our legal requirements and applicability of insurance for such vessels. So you can have your vehicle, it can arrive, you can take your family to a place. And in this way, once we are able to do this, cost and affordability can be better for us.
Professor Howell, do you have anything you'd like to add?
Yeah, not much really. I think David's covered it quite well. I mean, just to really emphasize that point of in the OECS, like nowhere else in the world, seaports are your intermodal connectors, both between countries, but also in some instances between the north and south or east and west ends of an island. And I think something that is going to be considered potentially further when we are really looking at the blue economy and national ocean policy as an integrated part of national planning, is looking at transport links both between islands and within an island, and looking at both maritime and land transport links. For example, whether it is better to short sea ship goods from one end of an island to another rather than build a new highway through the middle of a mountainous interior. And I really do believe that maritime transport has a key part to play when we're looking at the integrated planning of island nations.
Thank you. The next question is coming from one of our students joining us today, and it states, looking at the limited land space of our islands, is it really possible to develop economically without serious environmental degradation? And David, I'll let you take this one.
The question is very timely and important. I thank the students for this. Now, we actually would need to change many things which we are doing currently. It is impossible. It is not impossible, sorry, but it is important that we will also have to assess where we are in our developmental activities, and we will want to have to deal with this from the point of view of the approaches which we will have. It is possible for us to look at ecotourism, which is more developed in some places than others. We are not therefore using as much of this as we could. And I can envisage an integrated approach where there can be activities near to the shore, further inland, but even integrated packages among the OECS member states, where the advantage of a package on a particular island can be marketed as an OECS activity as a whole. And in this way, we can also scale back on what we are doing. This also has a link to our policy on land and housing and how we deal with this overall, our setbacks that would be necessary at shore areas, and how we would be able to do this. And considering this in a post-COVID context, whatever that may be, a new approach to building back better, these are some of the areas that we would also need to address.
Right. The next question is actually looking to build on earlier questions on capacity building, and that Dr. Felix responded to. I'll seek to answer this one. It states, can you speak to initiatives to build capacity within the national technical vocational education and training TVET institutions and Caribbean universities to graduate Caribbean students with both the skills and knowledge to work in the blue economy? So I'll take the TVET component first. I'm not aware of any specific actions being undertaken in the OECS to link TVET with blue economy skills. However, the institutional framework already exists in the region through the Caribbean Association of National Training Authorities, CANTA, which was established specifically to coordinate TVET in CARICOM states and facilitate the development of certified skilled labor. A number of national TVET councils also exist, such as the St. Lucia TVET Council. And interestingly, the St. Lucia TVET Council actually notes that the maritime sector is one of the fastest growing in the Caribbean. And their program includes training and skills within the maritime sector, including boating skills. So the avenue is there, and of course, there's always room for enhancements and scale up. As relates to the university level, there are a number of relevant programs, such as those offered by SOMES, that is the Center for Resource Management and Environmental Studies, offered at Cayville campus in Barbados. There's also the Marine Wildlife and Conservation Biology degree program at St. George's University in Grenada, as well as a number of others in Jamaica and in Trinidad at UE campuses. Of course, again, there's always room for enhancing and expanding such programs and providing a wider range of training options. I think we have time for just one question, and I'm going to pose this to David. Please be very brief on it. What incentives does the private sector need to scale up investments in the blue economy?
The private sector needs to know how they would be involved. And certainly one of the issues that we are looking at, currently scheduled for September 23rd and 24th, is an investor roundtable. Through this, we will hope to encourage the private sector to see the opportunities which are there for them to be able to come aboard. This would also look at the possibility of having development partners there so that the conversations can be had across the various stakeholders, that the support can be done for our private sector to become involved. At the end of it, we will hope then that all of what we do will also be sustainable and benefit the environment as well as our communities.
Thank you. We still have a couple of minutes. I'm going to pose another question to Dr. Howell. Do you see blue bonds as a possible financing mechanism to achieve a sustainable blue economy? We just have a minute on that, Professor Howell.
Yeah, blue bonds are a really interesting initiative that are currently being trialled in the Seychelles, and I believe there is talk about them in Grenada and St. Lucia as well, where countries can raise capital against environmental commitments and undertaking environmental management. It's based on a successful model from in terrestrial instances, which are green bonds. And yeah, I think there's quite a lot of possibility there. I think certainly what the last couple of years and certainly the last 6 months during the COVID crisis has taught us is that this idea of resilience, both environmentally and against climate, but also economically for island nations, is going to be really important. And finding ways to leverage the finance to be able to manage sustainably and to transition to a different way of doing things without relying too much, or at least not wholly, on external sources of income such as tourism is going to be really important.
Thank you. There was just one last question, and I'll just respond to it with my closing words. I'm assuming it's someone who's not part of the region who asks what the OECS is. The OECS is an intergovernmental organization. We currently have 11 members, and we work to ensure harmonization of policies and ensure that benefits that are accumulated for all our member states in terms of ocean governance and sustainable development in general. Tadia, if you could put the OECS's web link in the chat, that would be appreciated. Thank you. And I'd just like to say thank you all, especially to the students who joined us here today. And I hope you learned something, and I hope this incites you to look up more information, maybe online, etc., about the oceans and how you can be involved. As the younger generation who will be benefiting from this resource in the future, please don't silence yourselves. Please speak out on the issues and become involved in the decision-making processes through your blogs, through your Facebook, the social media pages, etc. Speak out on the issues and become involved. Thank you very much for participating all.